Yeah, hi folks. Yes, our mainstream media, or should I say scummy mainstream diarrhea, have targeted Winston Peters over some so-called mistake he made regarding the Christchurch terrorist attack. But it was just a ruse that stood out like dog's balls. It was designed for no other reason than to disrupt the coalition talks between Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon. The mainstream media in this country are deceitful bastards that propagate cherry-picked information to create a false narrative. And you can clearly see that One News collaborates with Newshub.
It was at Winston Peters' Auckland home that he opened his door for a private dinner, playing host to the Luxons. One News understands Amanda Luxon came bearing flowers, and while we don't know exactly what was on the menu, you can safely assume there was plenty of politics, all part of the incoming Prime Minister's plan.
The way I deal with things, I want to build chemistry and relationship first and foremost.
But last night, Mr. Peters was also serving up sour grapes. In this tweet, he claimed that the public only found out yesterday that the Prime Minister's office had received information about the March 15 massacre before it happened. He accused Jacinda Ardern of an appalling lack of transparency, calling it unacceptable. The only problem, we were told about it at the time.
I was one of more than 30 recipients of a manifesto that was mailed out 9 minutes before the attack took place.
While Mr. Peters wasn't keen to chat to One News today,
hello, this is Winston Peters. Please leave a message.
Others did weigh in.
The information that he's put up that is still as of yet uncorrected is simply not true.
Should Winston Peters take the tweet down, Simeon?
I mean, look, ultimately that's up to him. He's the leader of the New Zealand First Party.
Given Mr. Peters is looking like he'll be a key part of the next government, National's clearly keen to sit this one out. Others, though, found his tweet disturbing.
This is the age where tweets and social media can divert genuine public discourse. It can actually bring in misinformation and make it the fact. And we've seen that in Trump's America.
Mr. Peters might be wishing he'd kept his mouth closed. Instead, he's now looking, well, a bit of a fool.
Yeah, now watch Newshub, which is pretty much word for word exactly the same. Now I'll play this clip right through first, and then I'll come back to some interesting bits.
Winston Peters is doubling down on a claim former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern concealed details about the Christchurch terror attack.
On social media, he said the country only discovered yesterday that her office had received information about the attacks before it happened, when in reality Ardern released that detail 2 days after the attack.
The Islamic community slammed it as political posturing. Peters' potential coalition partners are refusing to comment. Political reporter Amelia Wade has more.
It was one of our darkest days, marked by political unity.
We want to ensure that there's no doubt that this is a unified political response beyond politics.
Then Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters stood by Jacinda Ardern in that response. Until now, the ongoing coronial inquest into the attacks yesterday heard evidence about the gunman's manifesto being sent to the PM's office. Peters followed that up with a tweet claiming, "We waited until today to find out for the first time that Ardern received information about the terrorist attack before the massacre took place." But Peters got this totally wrong, because just 2 days after the attack, Ardern told New Zealand,
I was one of more than 30 recipients of a manifesto that was mailed out 9 minutes before the attack took place.
It was also in the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the attacks.
This is there black and white. It's obviously he hasn't even read the Royal Commission. And that, for a senior statement.
The PM's office has urged Peters to remove his tweet and post a correction, but Peters instead chose to double down, posting late last night. For those political apologists and feckless media, not once were we transparently informed of this information. To excuse it because it was known at a public press conference is as bizarre as it is biased. Peters then tweeted this afternoon that his initial comment was about the location of the attacks.
What is more important, to learn the lessons of March 15th or political posturing for a short-term media burst. I think that kind of political tweeting, you can leave it in Trump's America.
But in Christopher Luxon's New Zealand, where he's trying to form a government that may very well involve New Zealand first, there was a deafening silence. David Seymour refused to say a peep and Peters wouldn't be interviewed. And the last Kiwis have heard from the man about to lead them was a tweet about the All Blacks last night, after saying yesterday morning all was well with coalition talks.
I would think it's important we get a foundation of good chemistry, of good trust, of good relationships in place.
And he's requiring a lot of trust from New Zealanders in this vacuum of silence.
Yeah, now back to the interesting bits. Now you'll notice how they blur this quickly so you can't read it.
For those political apologists and feckless media, not once were we transparently informed of this information. To excuse it because it was known at a public press conference is as bizarre as it is biased.
Yeah, now I'll read the full tweet in context. Yeah, now folks, between the brackets is what she read, and the rest was deliberately omitted because it doesn't look good for Ardern. For those political apologists and feckless media, there is an existing transcript of a phone call made by the Prime Minister to the Deputy Prime Minister at the vital time of a crisis when a terrorist had just massacred innocent people. Not once were we transparently informed of this information, such as the phone call her office made to the police, despite the obvious expectation and clear opportunity. To excuse it because it was known at a public press conference the next day, instead of information that should have been shared with the Deputy Prime Minister and coalition partner the day before, is as bizarre as it is biased. Yes, folks, there's a lot of context there that doesn't look good for Ardern. Now I'll play the next clip.
Peters then tweeted this afternoon that his initial comment was about the location of the attacks.
Now here they deliberately cut off the text so you can't read it properly. The gaslighting media can't defend the facts out today that vital information of the locations of the terrorist attacks were known by the Prime Minister's office before it happened. Yet the PM the next day said the police couldn't act because they didn't have that detail. The mosques weren't even warned. This was my point about critical information not being passed on. Yes, Ardern knew about the mosques. The email is said to contain gunman Brenton Tarrant's 87-page, 16,000-word manifesto, which named the mosques in the attack, and said he'd selected them about 3 months ago. Yeah, and yes, Ardern had read Tarrant's email, or parts of it. So why didn't she phone the mosques and the police directly, instead of handing it over to a bozo? Within 2 minutes of its receipt, Miss Ardern said the email, which she confirmed she had read parts of, was forwarded by her office to the parliamentary security. Now to the bozo.
The inquest into the March 15th terror attack has today heard the 111 call made by a parliamentary staffer. The Prime Minister's office was alerted to the impending attack by the terrorist himself, receiving a detailed email 7 minutes before the first shots were fired.
The staffer gave the 111 operator Brenton Tarrant's name and the locations of the planned attacks, but said it was probably just a crank or a nutter who sent the email and police didn't dispatch anyone initially. Juliet Speedy reports.
An email sent to Parliament by the Australian terrorist was received at 1:33 p.m. on March 15. 7 minutes later, at the exact time the first shot was fired at Al Noor Mosque, a parliamentary staffer thought he'd better call 111.
Now that is all on Ardern.
Appears to be indicating someone claiming that they've carried out an attack in Christchurch or planning an attack on Christchurch from a person by the name of Brenton, last name Tarrant.
During this call, Tarrant was arriving at Al Noor Mosque to commit mass murder.
It was originally aimed at Dunedin, but now it's aimed at the Linwood Mosque.
In Christchurch and Ashburton.
So at this time, Parliament and now police had the name and age of the terrorist, where he was from, his planned attacks, the locations of them, and his reasons for doing it. But the staffer also told the 111 operator he was probably a crank and a nutter, saying, "And it will be a nutter, I'm sure."
You can see a motivation, which is white supremacy, and you're drawing conclusions that, of course, just a nutter and it will be a nutter, I'm sure. What do you have to say about that?
I've drawn some very quick conclusions, but still have those concerns that I felt needed to be reported through to police.
Is there training for terrorist threats for your organisation and the job that you're in?
Not specifically, because not for a terrorist threat as such.
Is there anything that stands out to you as something that you would have done differently now?
No, not at all. I don't know what more we could have done.
This answer provoked audible reaction from families in the public gallery. Other 111 calls started to come in from the public at the same time as this phone call. But this nearly 12-minute call ended with the 111 caller making it a priority 2 event, that is, not urgent, and it ultimately ended in no one being dispatched and the event being closed.
The suggestion made by the caller that the email could possibly be a hoax, for this to have influenced the decision of the communicator as to the priority coding.
A phone call made with no idea of the murderous terror unfolding at the same time.
Well, Juliet, the coroner may recommend changes as a result of this inquest, but have any changes been made already as a result of this?
Yes, Sam, as far as the police are concerned, an inspector told the court today that a number of changes have been made since March 15, 2019, including better training and education for those police communicators and upskilling around terrorism and hate crime. And most importantly, all national security events are now, by matter of course, marked as a priority 1, P1, not P2, as happened in the phone call you just heard in my story there. But interestingly, the parliamentary staffer in that phone call told the court today that as far as he is aware, no major policy changes or changes to protocol have been made at Parliament in the way they would act if a similar threat was emailed in today.
Yes, folks. Clearly Ardern has a lot to answer for. She could have saved lives herself that day. But she won't have to answer any questions. But hey, look over there at Winston instead. Anyway, folks, I've posted all the relevant links below.